There, welcome back to Diary of a Speaker. With us right here is Dr. David Chotka. Hi, David.
Hi, Anthony. How you doing?
I'm doing good. How about you?
Good. So I think the weather in Greece and the weather in Canada is almost the same,
It's a bit hot
but
here.
not for very long.
It's a bit hot here. Now, before we get into, and I'm glad that you're here with us. Before we get into the episode, let me first let the viewer or the listener know that Dr. David Chotka has been here before. About a month ago, he was right here and he talked to us about the power of story, which was a great episode. Now, you can go and watch that episode because the link is in the description where you can land on that episode. It's a wonderful, wonderful episode. And so we decided to have Dr. David back here again to come and just continue from where he left because he's a great storyteller, and we didn't get have enough of his stories. So
Oh my.
let me now take one more minute because I know you have some stories to tell us, and today we're going to be talking in the perspective of from speaking to writing, um, but we'll go a step at a time.
Sure.
It's over to you. I know you have a lot to share with us.
Well,
Thank you
actually,
for coming.
as I was thinking about what I said to you a month ago, and what I gave your viewers or listeners opportunity to use a framework to write a story so they could speak it.
Hmm.
And it wasn't a hard thing to do. You said this is what happened to me. Everything was going well until suddenly, and then this happened to me, and then you write that out.
Yeah.
After I realized that this was going to take place, I took this step, and it led to this outcome. Something as simple as that creates the possibility of people engaging with the story and being able to listen to a story and participate in a story.
Hmm.
But in behind the story that you speak is hours of preparation where you do that work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I'll tell you where I learned this. So I'm a pastor, and I've had a number of churches. I've served entirely in Canada, although
Hmm.
I've taken trips across the earth to do various endeavors across the planet. In fact,
Okay.
I've even been to your home country of Kenya. I've been there, and I've never been to Greece. So you're going to have to invite me.
You're most welcome. Anytime. Anytime. We're looking forward to have you here sometime soon.
Okay, well, I'll tell. So let me just tell you how this whole thing around writing and storytelling started.
Okay.
I was working in a church that had a signing ministry for people who were deaf. And so it was impossible for them to hear what I was saying. So what I had to do was to do my research from Sunday to Thursday, and
Mhm.
by Thursday noon I had to get that thing done so that I could pass it to the people who were going to sign that for the deaf, so that they would be able to listen by watching. So the communication thing here really was on many levels. It
Okay.
started with my having to write out a narrative that would be compelling enough as a story for the signers to be able to understand it, and then for them to use sign language to communicate to the deaf. And
Yeah.
so really there's
That's
three
a good
levels there.
description. Listen by watching.
Actually, they listened by watching it. It was a most remarkable thing. They
Yeah.
would do what I call a signing choir.
Hmm.
And there was like 20 of these people who would show up inside a choir, and what they would do is they crank the music up very loud because they could feel the vibrations in their body,
Yes.
and
Yes.
then they would sign together while a song was being played over the loudspeaker.
Okay.
And so there was somebody who was standing at the front who would keep them in time while
Yes.
they did the various signing actions. And of course, the whole congregation was a hearing congregation, able to listen. So they would
Okay.
hear the music and they would watch the signers, and it was really an act of beauty.
Wow.
The communication happened with body language, not with speech.
Yeah.
So communication is involved in many levels, right? I mean, you
Mhm.
have you have audio, you have visual, you have the sight bucket, you have the ear bucket, you have the visual bucket where you see, and you have the sensory thing where people feel.
Mhm.
So I just remember the moment where I realized I wasn't going to be able to tell them a story to make them laugh or to make them cry or to make them think unless I wrote it out in a way that could be translated across a culture, because the deaf culture is very different from the hearing culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
Language is different. The way you
Mhm.
approach it is different. If you
Mhm.
use English sign, it's one letter at a time. Use American sign, you get concepts. But regardless of this, it's never quite perfect.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I
you
get
have
it.
to. So what I wound up learning to do, and this is very early when I started writing my
Mhm.
sermons, I used to sort of like put 3 points on a piece of paper, and then I'd stand up in front of the crowd and I'd do my best to try and interact with the crowd and speak to them and so on and so forth. And a lot of the material that I gave you the last time was what I would do in that process there. So I will encourage your audience to go back and listen to the one that I did before, where I give a framework about how to create a story. That's a very, very
Yeah.
helpful approach. But I used that.
Mhm.
So here's what happened. I had no choice except to reduce to writing the story that I wanted to tell
Every time,
every
every
time.
week.
And so if you don't know how to reduce your story to writing, you really haven't mastered the story.
So
So
I tell a story and I cannot put it in writing form. That's I have not understood that story.
that's what it boils down to. And
Yeah.
so what you do with your story is you begin with the end point of your story in mind. You do what Stephen Covey said in the Seven
Yeah.
Habits.
Begin with the end in mind.
You
Okay.
begin with the end in mind. You
Yeah.
say, well, my goal is to tell people about this to get them to this point so that we can end with this climax.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't start to write your story in that kind of a way, you won't succeed with your story.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing worse than a rambling story that has no application point. There's nothing worse. Have you been to some of those lectures?
Oh,
Oh,
I've been to meetings where I hear a speaker speak for 1 hour and I'm like, what did he just say?
what did he just
What
say?
did
So
he just say?
the best
There was
speaking
no
is
call to
actually,
action.
yeah, the best
Yeah.
speaking is actually a reflection of the best writing. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, the best writing is a reflection of the best speaking. And the two of
Mm-hmm.
them are intertwined. And so I will show you this. I wrote this book, Hey, Are You There? It's Me, God, How to Listen, Test, and Know When God Speaks. But this book has the foreword by a guy named Jack Canfield, who wrote
Oh,
stories
it's a
called
great
Chicken
writer,
Soup for the Soul. Yes.
speaker. Yeah.
So I don't know if you know this. This man has sold 600 million copy of his books.
Yeah, the
Six,
chicken soup for the soul. Yeah.
yes. So
Wow, that's
apparently,
wonderful.
the greatest writer before that of nonfiction was a guy by the name of Dr. Seuss.
Okay.
And so Dr. Seuss wrote stories. That's
Yes.
what he did in order to equip young people on the ability to be able to play with rhyme and learn how to attach, a story, et cetera, et cetera. But
Mm-hmm.
but the two greatest writers in the history of the English language were people who took story and reduced it to writing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can do that, then the book becomes your entry point for people to consider asking you to come to speak.
Mm.
And so they intertwine with each other. And so it's I think it's an important exercise. But Jack Canfield wrote the foreword to that book because he liked my ability to tell stories.
Wow. Well, you are a great storyteller, as I said in the beginning.
So let
Yeah.
me tell you the story that
Okay.
really got his attention.
Okay.
So
Go ahead.
here's how it worked out.
Mm-hmm.
It was about 20 minutes to 10 at night, and I was in a medium-sized city in Canada that had one grocery store in it. And as it turned out, my daughter always had milk with her Cheerios every morning. She always did. This is if the milk wasn't there, she wouldn't eat the Cheerios. If the Cheerios weren't there, she wouldn't drink the milk. So anyway, I was reading a book and I was sipping some of this milk and I used it all up. And then I realized the next morning my daughter was not going to have milk for her Cheerios.
Mm-hmm.
So I called upstairs and I said, "My love, listen, the grocery store closes in 15 minutes. I'm going to get in the car and I'm going to drive and pick up that milk so Jessica has milk with her breakfast in the morning." So I go outside and it's dark outside. I get in the car and I close the door. And I'll just tell you something. I'm a pastor and I'm serving a church. And this church sings all these new songs, that go, Jesus, I love you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. They don't tell stories and they're kind of repetitious. And I like the old stuff.
Uh-huh.
So I'm in the car. I turn the radio on and a beautiful, beautiful, gorgeous 19th century Anglo-Irish hymn comes over this thing. And I am caught up in the majesty and the beauty of this song. And
Mm-hmm.
it was a song that had actually healed my emotions years before when I had gone through a difficult time. That listening to that music brought me to a place of consolation. It brought me to a place of settled conviction that I needed. I had not done anything wrong. I did the right thing. I was misunderstood, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm listening to this song and I'm starting to sing the words because I only sing when the door is closed and nobody can hear me.
Uh-huh.
So I am driving down the road. It's now 10 minutes to 10. And I drive right past the entrance to the grocery store, just right past. And then I
Okay.
realized I'm supposed to get milk for my daughter. I got 7 minutes left. I turn the car around and I start driving back toward the grocery store. And my father had just died. And his
Oh.
favorite hymn was What a Friend We Have in Jesus. And there
Mm.
was this beautiful rendition of this old hymn coming over the radio. And suddenly I started getting nostalgic for my dad. You know, he was like, it's not like he was a spring chicken. He died at 88. He died of natural causes. He died surrounded by loved ones, you know, et cetera. So it wasn't bad.
Mm.
But anyway, driving down, I'm thinking about my dad. I'm remembering this thing. The tears are coming down my face, and I drive right past the entrance to the grocery store again. And as I'm driving around, I am feeling a connection with God. I'm just feeling like I'm totally with him because I haven't sung these old hymns for a very long time because the church I was in singing all this modern stuff that I didn't know or understand. But
You
they
missed
loved it, so I
grocery store twice.
yeah. So anyway, I'm driving around, and more of this old music comes along, and I'm just worshiping God. And it's starting to get dangerous for me to drive because I wanted to close my eyes, and I thought I better pull my car over somewhere. And I pull into a driveway, and I close my eyes to listen to that last song, and I am caught up in the rapture and the beauty and the majesty of the music and the words and the excellence of the music itself. And without even thinking, I turned the car off. My eyes are still closed. I open the car door. I walk toward this house, and I knock on somebody's door at 10 minutes past 10 at night. And I wake up, I suddenly come to myself, and I thought, what am I doing? it's 10 past 10 at night. What am
Yeah.
I doing? I've never been to this house before. This is crazy. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm trying to, now, do you have a game in Greece where people run away after they knock on a door? Do you have one of those games? In
I never
Canada, we call that Nicky Nine Doors. You know?
Nicky Nine doors.
You knock on the door and you run away, and then people open the door and there's nobody there. It's just a kids game.
Yeah, I think they do it, but I haven't seen it here, by
Oh,
the way.
okay. Well,
But
anyway,
from where I come from, I've witnessed that where people hit on doors and then they run. They run. These are children, by the
that's
way.
a children's. That's right.
Yeah,
It's
children.
nephews and nieces and grandchildren do that to grandma and grandpa and that kind of thing. Anyway, I thought to myself, maybe I should play Nicky Nine Doors and head back to the car and drive away. So in behind the door, I hear voices, and the door opens, and it's a couple from my congregation.
Wow.
And I had never been to that house before. It was
Uh-huh.
It was a city of about 30,000 people. And I realized reason I recognized him was because the guy had an enormous beard that
Okay.
would make Santa Claus go into a bidding war with the godly Amish. I mean, we're talking about this beard was just huge.
Mm-hmm.
He still has a huge beard. And he had tattoos all over his head, all the way down his arms, and they were dark black tattoos going into his fingernails. And he was married to this young, beautiful church mouse. So he looked like and he had ear gauge expander earrings in his ears, right?
Uh-huh.
And he had this demeanor. And so I made it. My church was about 800 to 1,000 people, but there was only a couple of doors.
Okay.
So I'd stand at one of those doors, and if I saw a newcomer, I'd get their name. I would say hello to them. And if they came a second week, I'd use their name. That was a great way for you to be able to meet people. So
Yeah.
anyway, I remembered their names. It was Tim and Sarah, right? So because he was so unusual looking that it was hard not to remember his name. Anyway,
Yeah.
he opens the door, and there they are. It's Tim and Sarah. And I look at them, and I said, Tim, Sarah, how you doing? And then Sarah looks at Tim, and she starts giving him the elbow like this. She gives him the elbow. And she said, you see, it's true. It's true. God hears our prayers. And he looks at her and he says, yes, it is true. God hears our prayers. And they started to laugh, and then they started to cry. And I thought, what are you talking about? And so they invited me in.
Yeah.
This is now about 20 after 10 at night.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in their home. I've never been in their home before. I've never driven by that street before. I just did this crazy thing because I was caught up. And as I'm standing there, they said,
I wonder what the daughter gonna have for breakfast.
here's the backstory. So
Yeah,
as I'm standing
keep on
there,
going. Yeah.
they tell me what had happened.
Yeah.
They had a terrible argument. You see, she was one of these nice, kind, sweet church girls. He was a guy who did not know anything about the faith at all.
Yes.
He met the pretty girl. He asked her out. And she said, no, I don't date people who don't belong to, I got to know that you love the Lord, you belong to the church, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And she said, if you want to spend time with me, you can come to church. Sit beside me. And oh, by the way, after church, you can come home with my dad, and my dad and I will serve lunch to you, and we'll visit. And that was as much as she would allow him to do. Mm-hmm. Well, he really liked the girl, and he showed up. And in the course of time, he said yes to the gospel. He said yes to the claims of Christ, started to be a believer. And then they married. And then they moved to my city because it was a lot cheaper than the city that they were living in. It was a 25-minute drive. So, I mean, it was
Okay.
easy to do. And they
Mm-hmm.
saved a lot of money by buying a house there. And they wanted to check out a church. So they came to mine and I met them at the door and I saw the big beard and so on, got their names. Anyway, what happened was when they got married, his background caught up with her behaviors. They were very, very different backgrounds. And
Mm,
they had some terrible argument.
mm,
They were arguing with each other about something that he was doing that she didn't approve of, and she was saying things to him that he didn't need to hear, and she was saying things to her that she didn't need to hear, and they
mm,
actually started to hurt each other. And then in the middle of the argument, they both realized they were hurting each other.
mm.
So they stopped, they asked forgiveness, they hugged, and then they collapsed together on the floor hugging, and they said, "Oh God, we need help. We need help right now.
Yeah,
Send Pastor David to our home. Send him to our home. Send him now. Send him now." And then I knocked on the door because I was singing and didn't see him.
yeah.
And so I wound up at a house with a couple of people that I did not know from a hole in the ground because I was distracted by the experience of worship as I was driving down the road.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Now that's a story.
Yeah,
That's a
yeah.
story about being guided. It's a story about hearing the voice of God without realizing you're hearing the voice of God.
Mm-hmm,
I was distracted by worship to be brought to a place where I could be the answer to the prayer of this young couple. And
mm-hmm.
subsequently, in the course of time, they became great friends. So Jack Canfield loved that story.
Where was it? Where did you put it? Where did you write it
It's
on?
it's in this book here. It's the
Ah,
very
okay,
first story in this book.
okay.
Hey, are you there? It's me, God. How to
Yeah,
listen, test, and know.
yeah, yeah,
So what
yeah,
happened was I wound up in a seminar with Jack Canfield
yeah. Okay,
on storytelling and how
okay.
to reduce story to writing. So some of what you received through that last seminar came from him. Some of it came from other coaches, and some of it was my own creation.
Okay.
So I'll give credit where credit's due. But the
Mm-hmm.
bottom line was, I signed up for a seminar with Jack Canfield. There's a company called Bradley Communications in the United States,
Okay.
and twice or three times a year, they bring 17 people into a cohort.
Mm-hmm.
And then you pay Canfield to be able to be there. And then he reviews your manuscript and you talk to other authors about how you're writing your work and
Okay.
whether or not your stories are actually having the power to attract people to want to read more.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in the middle of your story, you have to have an action point
Mm-hmm.
that brings people into what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Now, the same is also true for speaking.
Yeah,
What I
exactly.
learned from that presentation, from that material, is to write is to speak.
To
And
write
to
is to speak.
speak,
Is
yes,
to
to
write.
write is to speak. And
Ah.
if you don't discipline yourself to learn the disciplines of writing, your speaking will not have anywhere near the same kind of power.
Mm.
And so, and I learned that way back in the day where I had to communicate to the deaf ministry
Mm-hmm.
that, and I had to make sure that my words were small. Winston Churchill never used anything more than a two-syllable word.
Wow.
When he spoke, if you
Yes.
read his speeches,
Mm-hmm.
there's the odd word that has three syllables, but most of his words were in very ordinary, plain speech. And he
Mm.
would use one, two, or at maximum three-syllable words so that people could remember what it was that he said while he was saying it to be able to drive home his application point. Now, of
Make it
course,
as simple as possible.
yes, but
Mm-hmm.
you don't have, it doesn't mean your speech has to be short, although some of his speeches were short.
Mm-hmm.
What you have to do is to make sure that your use of language in your storytelling narrative does not become so complex that they lose the story for the complexity of the words.
Mm.
And so you create your narrative in plain language so that ordinary people who are using two and three syllable words all the time easily access what it is that you're trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you write it, it's I'll just say this to you because I learned this discipline with that deaf ministry. If you do not write in a way that is compelling, those who are signing your work into another culture are not going to find it compelling either.
Mm.
You have to create a narrative that has an application point quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And the application point has to be transferable to somebody else's brain to be able to say it, to get into their mind too.
Wow.
So actually, that's where I learned the discipline of telling the story. I
Okay.
had to do that every week, and I did it in three of the five churches I served, and I served one of those churches for 7 years. I served one of them for 6 years. I served one of them for 5 years. So that's what? That's 6 and 5 and 3. And sorry, 5. That's a lot of years.
Yeah, a lot of years.
It's a
Just
lot of
just
years.
add them together.
Yeah, if you put them on, two of them were in a row. I mean, two of
Okay,
those churches were so one 6 years and one 7 years was 13 years in a row,
13 years. Yeah.
where I had to have that manuscript done by Thursday morning, Thursday noon,
Mm,
so that I could pass it over to the person that was going to be signing it. And my last assignment was here in Windsor, Ontario. I served
okay.
a church in Alberta where I didn't do that, and then I
Hmm.
moved to Windsor, and there's once again a signing ministry. But it wasn't hard to accommodate because I had learned that if you write and you write in a way that is similar to how you speak, people engage with the writing in the same way as they engage with the speaking. And
Mm.
then the book, when you publish the book, it becomes your calling card for an invitation to speak. That's what happens.
Wow. Tell us now, because in our previous episode, you told us about how one of your books was given out in thousands. Uh,
Yes.
and we talking about your business card. Maybe I want to imagine that is I am on a flight. I give a friend a copy. I give someone uh, just one. But in your experience, and this could be different to someone who's listening, what's the biggest apart from that now that you sold that you gave 16,000 that were catered for by the people who are sponsoring?
Yep.
What other times have you sold a big chunk of books, and how did
Well, straight up,
it
you
come to
have
be
to
so?
have a compelling book for people to want to purchase it, and then
Yeah.
you have to link together your social media feeds together with your writing, together with your. So here's what it boils down to: you need an Instagram that feeds a Facebook, which feeds a YouTube, which feeds a Twitter, X now,
Mm-hmm.
which feeds a blog, which then supports the YouTube channel, which then illustrates your book. And all of them have to work together to create opportunity for you to be invited to speak.
Mm.
So the times when I sell the most books are when I am present to an event where I have been advertised and where I am known. So right now, actually, what I'm doing right now, I'm preparing for this event as we speak.
Yeah.
My first book here, this one that I gave away in Uganda, the 16,000 copies.
Mm-hmm.
This has just been translated into Vietnamese.
Okay.
And so I am traveling to Vietnam, and the Vietnam's people have been under communist domination, and for years they were not allowed to have Christian books
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because communism says faith is the opiate of the masses, that kind of thing, based upon Karl Marx's worldview.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, recently there has been an opening so we can go into the country, and if we print the books in country and there's no criticism of the government, we're allowed to print those books. Well, I
Okay.
wrote that book with no intention to criticize any government. I wanted to give people skills. That's all I
Yeah.
wanted.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And so it's an easy thing. So
Mm-hmm.
as it turned out, this is an interesting story. I was speaking in Australia, and I met someone who came to my seminar on Tuesday night. It was a lady who was Chinese who had lived in Vietnam together with her friend who was Vietnamese. The two of them walked up to me and said, do you have your speaking in writing in Vietnamese? I said, no. They said, if you give us a written manuscript, we'll translate it for you and get it into Vietnamese and take it into that country. I said, you want to translate my book into Vietnamese? They said, yes. I said, well, that's usually $30,000 to $50,000 worth of work.
Mm.
And they did it out of the goodness of their hearts for free
Wow.
because they wanted to get that teaching into what used to be communist Vietnam, because they had one of the ladies was in fact a refugee from that country. She
Mm-hmm.
had married a Vietnamese man. He was a pastor and she was the pastor's wife. They were living in Australia, and they
Okay.
wanted to be able to help the people who were still in country. And there's 88 million Vietnamese who live there. My
Yes.
denomination has 1.2 million adherents in that
Oh.
country,
Oh.
and so but they don't have resources.
Okay.
So I was teaching this material on the Lord's Prayer. They wanted it translated, and so they took it on themselves to do this. And then I got an invite to be the speaker at an event in my denomination, which is going to be held in that country.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have put the book into their hands. They're making sure that the Vietnamese is good translation. And then there's been a donor who is paying for the
The
printing and the
printing.
distribution of the books. So
Okay.
that's going to happen. So just yesterday, I was in a conversation with a man who is going to that event because there will be people from communist China there. And
Okay.
he is a Chinese coordinator. And he said, I already translated your book into Chinese. Do you think we can distribute it there as well? And I said, let's do that.
Hmm.
So it'll go there. Now, in the meantime, I'm going to be doing events in churches that are around that. But
Okay.
it's so here's the interaction, here's the interplay.
Mm-hmm.
The conference creates the opportunity for the books. The books create the opportunity for the conference.
Mm,
And the interaction between speaking and writing is constant.
mm.
And so sometimes the book becomes the point of entry. And that's what happened in the case of this translation of this book.
Okay.
But the speaking is what created the translating. So I spoke in Australia. People said we need to take your material and get it into writing. Let's get the writing and give it to the Vietnamese. And now I'm speaking because I'm writing. And so
Wow.
they interplay with each other all the time.
Wow. Oh,
So
that's wonderful. And this is to everybody who's out there, who you're listening or you're watching, whatever it is. And now you have a better picture of what you should be doing. If you're thinking of becoming a speaker, or you're already a speaker, think about writing. Now, if you happen to watch this, which is a diary of a speaker, and you are a writer, then you can start thinking of how you can get some uh, speaking gigs, get to stand on stage, talk about your subject, the topic that you're passionate about, and also talk about your book. I mean, they go together, and that's a very good
actually,
example.
let me recommend something to you.
Okay.
If you are speaking and you have written a speech, the way that you speak to the crowd is a little different than the way you would write the book.
Mm-hmm.
All right. But you can take the content that you have spoken about and then you can reduce it to writing into a single chapter. And then the next time you speak, you add more content and you take that speaking that you have done. And with about 2.5, 3 hours work, you can take the way that you have spoken and turn it into a way that's written. And then align your chapters until you've done 10 presentations. You've got 10 chapters for your book.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Then
Beautiful.
that's it's not a hard strategy. It's
Yes.
used by many, many, many internationally renowned speakers, and
Mm-hmm.
they make that their approach. So if you read the Harvard Business Review and if you look at materials that are there, there's many of the books that are on that were lectures or approaches that were given by Harvard University faculty
Mm-hmm.
inside the framework of a classroom. And with about 2 hours work, they take the content of the lecture and they turn that into a chapter that turns into a rollout for a business book.
Wow.
That's what they do.
Wow. It's called what they're calling repurposing in our
Yes, it
presentation.
is.
Repurposing. So it's a good concept, and yeah, we love that and what you share. And now you've been speaking for those years, and you continue to speak, and we'll be glad to get to see you or hear you some other place. And we know you're moving to Vietnam, maybe probably most.
There'll be two conversations. One in Cambodia,
Yeah.
and I've preached in Australia. I've preached in Indonesia. I've spoken in Japan. Those are the Asian ones. I've set 6 nations in Europe, and the United States, Canada, and parts of Latin America. So I've been on all the inhabited continents. I've also been to Central Africa. I've been
Yes.
to Uganda and to Kenya, and
Yes.
I've spoken in South Africa as well. And
Yes, and
so
you shared that in our first episode, which we are asking people to go and watch. Find the link in the description. Go watch that one also.
yes,
Uh-huh. So, um, how many books so far, if I remember well?
I've written 5 so
5.
far, and
Yeah.
I'm writing 2 more as we speak. I'm writing a book on. I'm writing a book on Mark's Gospel from the Bible, and I'm turning. What I'm going to do with that book is kind of fun.
Mm-hmm.
Most translation is boring.
Okay.
What I want to do, Mark's Gospel is written in a very primitive kind of a way. I don't know if you've done any kind of work. Now you're in Greece, so maybe you do read Greek. If you
Yes.
would go back in the early manuscripts, the Greek manuscripts, you will see that it feels like somebody is coming from a different culture and translating.
Mm-hmm.
The word immediately, euthus, is used 88 times in 16 chapters. It's like somebody who says, I was talking to you, by the way, I
Yes.
was,
Yes. Yes.
88 times. And,
Uh-huh.
and there's this primitive kind of thing, but it's actually written in slang.
Mm.
And so I want to translate Mark and put it into kind of like common idioms and pick up on some of that kind of slangy stuff so that it doesn't come across as some erudite thing with your nose in the air. And then
Mm.
I'm writing a commentary about the content. So that's one of that's the big project. There's another project. The church has asked me to do a course here. And I wrote out course content for that material, and they said, well, reduce it to writing and turn it into a resource we can use in our church. So I'm doing that. So those
Okay.
are the two other projects that are on the works right now. So it'll be 7 in about a year.
7. And
But I'll tell you this,
yes.
whenever you get the book out, people read the book and then they invite you,
Yeah.
and then you speak.
Mm-hmm.
And what they'll often do is they'll go to your website and they'll see whether or not they like your speaking ability based upon your YouTube channel or your Instagram page or whatever.
Yeah.
And if so, what you have to do is you have to keep, and with Instagram, it's got to be really short, 30 seconds to a minute. If it's more than that, they will tune it out. If you go to YouTube, they want 5 minute spiels. If they want something longer, and they'll go on a podcast and they'll listen to a podcast while they're driving from point A to point B. And so I become a podcast guest. That's what I've done. And then in fact, I took your podcast and I published it on mine. And then people will say, oh, if this person can sustain an argument or a conversation for half an hour, 45 minutes, then it's appropriate for us to bring him in and pay the money to cause the person to travel. And if they have content that they can leave after he or she has spoken, then that creates energy. And the secret sauce, by the way, the secret sauce to changing a culture is to have an event followed by a process.
Have an event followed by a process.
Yes, because in the event, you're drinking water from a fire hose. The speaker is all fired up with his or her content. They want you to learn this as fast as you possibly can. You will get a headache as you take notes. But, then you can't possibly retain all of that.
Yes.
If you do not immediately follow it with a process, you'll only retain 10 to 15% of what was said. If, on the other hand, and this is what I've learned to do with 2 of my courses so far, so I'll give you the content in a second. So if, on the other hand, you go into a context and you deliver your content inside the framework of a concentrated event, like a Friday night, Saturday, or an all-day Saturday, or then you say, oh, by the way, I have a Zoom class that I teach. Here is a content. And what I did with this book was I turned it into 5 days a week of interaction around a story with an application point.
Okay.
People love stories.
Yes, they do. They do love stories.
They love stories. So every day has a story. Every day, in this case, has a biblical text that talks about the same kind of thing. Every day has a write-out journal thing. Okay. And then at the end of 5 days, you have learned 5 principles. Then there's a day off to reflect. And then there's a meeting where you do once a week. And then the people talk about what it is that they have learned. And you do that for 6 weeks. And what I did with this course was I took all of the things that I taught over the week and I turned it into an organizational grid that can be learned at the end of the process.
Okay.
And so they learned 25 ways to pay attention to what it is that God is saying to them in the first 5 weeks. They've had 5 weeks of talking with each other about what it is that they have been learning. And then in the 6th week, they take all those pieces together and they put them into an organizational grid that they can use to learn. And so the secret sauce is give it to them thick and fast. Let them learn what it is you are trying to impart to them. Yes. And then put the resource in their hands with a process that walks them through baby steps to learn one small step at a time.
Wow.
Culminating in a process. And what I've done with this course is I teach it, then I put the books in their hands, then I give them a series of YouTube clips where I teach for 10 minutes about what it is that's the content of that week. And then I give them study guide application questions. So that at the end of 6 weeks, they have processed what I said to them really fast, like water through a fire hose in a 3-day event.
Wow.
That's the secret sauce.
That's beautiful. And thank you for sharing that with us. Now, in the process of writing up to 7 books right now, and I'm guessing you won't stop. Why should someone write more books?
Because you have a story to tell, or you have listen, if you have to try and think about what you're writing, you haven't got the guts to write your book. The story should apprehend your soul so that it spills out of you. And if I scratch you, you should bleed that content. All right. So if it's in you, it's because you have been imparted something, not just for you, but for another.
Okay.
And so in my case, I believe in the gospel. I'm talking about the principles that are found in the Bible. And I'm talking about the things that I was not able to learn when I went through my own training. Okay. I'm talking about the experiences of life that I've had that are in harmony with the faith that I hold, where I'm trying to give to people who are rising in the next generation the tools that I did not receive when I was training. That's what I'm trying to do. And so when you write, you don't write because you want to have some fun. Now, some people write for fun. A novel is a way of creating fun.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
You're
yeah.
living in some fantasy world and you're creating this. And when I want to escape, I'll read a novel, right?
Mm.
But if actually, I haven't done that for years because now I would usually watch a movie. But it's a story. See,
Actually, actually.
it's a story. So
Wow.
what I've learned is if you want to give something didactic because you're skilled in a particular area of expertise, like engineering or mathematics or budgeting or whatever, then
Mm.
you're doing that because you want to benefit the audience that's going to receive your teaching.
Mm-hmm.
They won't be able to summarize all of that if they just have a weekend. But if they have a weekend where they learn 5 or 6 of those principles, and all you've done is given them the beginnings of 5 or 6 different approaches, that's when you put the resource in their hands. And so to speak is to write, and to write is to speak. If you
Wow.
don't do that, you're not going to teach your people. It's not going to happen. And
Uh-huh.
the only reason to write is because you want to impart something.
Wow.
You
Wow.
believe in your message, whatever the message happens to be, whether it's a message about something ordinary like dieting, budgeting, economics, about chemistry or science or whatever. In my case, faith. I want to impart what I believe to another. And so also does the university professor who's teaching business skills. So
Yeah.
also does the
Mm-hmm.
history professor who wants to tell their students about the historical events that were around whatever narrative they happen to put their fingers on. Everybody wants to impart, and you should do that as a blessing to those who are the recipients of your writing. It will be the fire will turn on when you speak, and the slow burn will happen while they absorb the principles in your writing one small step at a time.
Mm. Mm. Whoa, 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 whoa. Dr. David, once again, it's been such a blessing to have you here.
Thank you.
We are coming to the end of our episode today, and we really appreciate you. Thank you very much for coming.
Oh, you're welcome, Anthony. And look, can I tell people where to find me?
Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead
Okay.
and tell them where to find you.
Okay. So I know you're going to put this on the screen as well, but my website is www.spirit, like Holy Spirit, and equip like equipment. Spiritequip.com. Put those 2 words together, put a dot and a comma at the end of that. And there are links there to my books, to the invitation page, to the teaching sessions that I do on Zoom, to the Facebook account, the Instagram, the YouTube, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's all there. And if you come on that, you can subscribe and you can get you can get monthly updates on what I'm doing, et cetera, et cetera. But the best part of it all is that when you go there, you can access how I speak, see?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then you can access how I write. And these two intertwine with each other all the time.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Wow. To everyone who's out there, this has been Diary of a Speaker. Today we had David Chotka. Dr. David Chotka has been here before and left us wanting more. And that's why he came back today and talked to us about speaking and writing. They go together. You be a speaker, think of writing, you're a writer, think of speaking. And it's a wonderful world out there. Please, Dr. David, leave us with just a few words that we should always remember as we go from this episode.
Well, actually, I'll give you a quote from the Old Testament.
Go ahead.
Write the vision, put it on tables, that he who reads it may run. It says you're supposed to reduce it to writing so that the people who read it can start to be equipped and move forward in power. And what will happen is they will read it, they will speak it, and they will run. I would encourage anybody who's a speaker to reduce to writing what it is that you have already said. And there's gold there. There's gold there. You have things that you can share that other people need to hear and know. That's what I leave with you.
Wow, wow. Thank you. That's a wonderful, wonderful quote, a wonderful verse. We appreciate you. And once again, we can't thank you enough, Dr. David, for coming to our show.
Well, you're welcome, Anthony. It's a joy.
Yes, as we also thank all the people who've been watching us or listening to us. And yeah, go and speak more, write more, spread the message, equip the people, and let's have a better world just because you've been here. Thank you, and bye for now. Bye.